Thank you, Walter, and thanks everyone for coming out. This is a work in progress. It is a popular book rather than a scholarly book. That does not mean it doesn't have scholarly elements, of course. That's why I'm sticking Shakespeare in the title, and because that's what I do. I use Shakespeare to think and talk, and in this case I also occasionally use Shakespeare for as a metaphor for the humanities writ large. He functions nicely in that way for all sorts of reasons. So let me start with a little Shakespeare, which I have up on the screen. One of the scholarly questions, to the extent the book does deal with scholarly questions, the book raises is, how do words come to be? How do certain words stick in the language or in the culture, and how other words don't? And I suppose that's more of a linguistic question, and a lot of deep research has been done there. But let's start with one of the words that Shakespeare is credited with bringing into the English language, one that's stuck around a long time and is still sort of evolving as we speak, which is swagger. I don't know, Shakespeare gets an awful lot of credit in the Oxford English Dictionary for inventing words. Some of that credit may be overblown. There was a tendency with the OED compilers to sort of turn to Shakespeare because he was the handy source available, but nonetheless, I'm sure he had a hand in some of this. But again, swagger. The word swagger for Shakespeare doesn't mean that much different than it means for us, which is, here's Mistress Quickly, talking about swaggering, and keep in mind who Mistress Quickly is in Henry Part 4. She is she's the head of the brothel, right? And she does not like swaggerers. She wants to keep them out. If he swagger, let him not come here. No, by my faith, I must live among my neighbors. All those swaggerers, I am in good name and fame with the very best. Shut the door, there comes no swaggerers here. I have not lived all this while to have swaggering now. Shut the door, I pray you. Sort of wonderful language, and again, the term has come down to us. And it's also evolved. You know, we don't just have swaggering, we have swag. You know, Walter in the Humanities Center has very nice swag that they pass out to guests, and probably second only in the university to my other English department colleague, Jerry Herron, over at the Honors College, who I think still has the edge in quality swag that they're able to distribute. But again, this gives you a sense of what I'm talking about. Certain words, however, don't stick. For example, here's a word that came into the English language not that long ago, and it didn't stick. Schmet. Familiar with it? No. Schmet. It's kind of an awkward one, right? Eric and I just schmet, and I'm happy. I'm happy we did. For some reason, schmet did not stick. Why? Again, good question for linguists to sort of ponder and answer and explore. One reason, an aesthetic answer would be simply, it's a pretty clunky term, right? Just on simple everyday language. Smet's sort of ugly and clunky. Actually, schmet was the first word for STEM. When people were sitting around in the Bush administration trying to figure out what we're going to call STEM, they initially came up with schmet. Instead of STEM, 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 which of course we all know what the word STEM or the acronym STEM is, and how it's sort of come to occupy such a big part of academic life. And when I say academic life, I mean academic life writ large. STEM is exploding as a term, as an idea, as a concept, as a marketing tool, from preschool all the way up, of course, through graduate studies, into industry, the corporatization of the university, and all those sorts of things. But STEM, when it started out here, by the way, STEM, I've got it nicely interested. You can't really see it, but this is a nice picture of Betsy DeVos and Ivanka Trump and somebody, I don't know if that's Sean Spicer, somebody in a space suit. I mean, you can find images like this all over the place. STEM marketing loves this sort of picture, and sort of curiously, by the way, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit, lots of people love STEM. It seems to sort of cross the political spectrum. You know, we the Trumps, the DeVosses over here. We'll talk a little bit about President Obama and STEM as well. Somehow this is an acronym that has become a word, a very popular word, that seems to cross political divides in one of the most divisive political times in recent memory. And so part of what I'm trying to explore in this book is, how did that happen? Why did that happen? Should that make us happy, or should that make us nervous? In other words, we like things that supposedly cross political divides. Those are generally a good thing. I tend to think, however, a little bit more suspiciously, a little bit more skeptically. I'm of the sort, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. I'm also deeply suspicious of words or terms or ideas that tend to resist criticism. One of the things I'll be talking about is that STEM as a term, as an organizing principle, has, for the most part to date, resisted a kind of criticism, resisted a kind of critique from any part of the political divide, and that's a central piece of the book. So how did we move from SMET to STEM? Well, we have up here one of my favorite movies, Slapshot. You'll remember this is Michael Onkeen at the end of the film, skating around nude. How did we move from SMET to STEM? Well, we had an old-time hockey at the University of Vermont, old-time hockey scandal. What do I mean by that? Well, here is the person often credited with moving SMET into STEM and sticking with this. This is Judith Romiley. She is was a biologist by training. She got her PhD at UCLA in 1966. Quite an accomplishment. There weren't too many female biologists at that time period. She worked her way up the administrative ladder, as one does in the modern era, hopping from administrative post to administrative post, notching up administrative achievements, and then taking on other positions as you rise through the ranks. And she eventually, after this, found herself finally at the pinnacle. She was the president of the university. She got to be president of the University of Vermont. Not a bad job. Vermont's a very pretty place. It's a nice enough university. But while at Vermont, she ran in again to this hockey scandal. Let me flip ahead here. Here's which I titled "The Rise and Fall of Romiley." Here's a New York Times description of what happened to Judith Romiley while at Vermont. University officials who have been widely criticized for slowness to respond and secretiveness about the hazing allegations issued a report about the incident January 4th and acknowledged that recruits to the hockey team had been coerced into drinking large amounts of alcohol, parading naked while holding one another's genitals, and engaging in other degrading activities. Well, President Romiley did what all administrators are told not to do. She tried to cover this up. Nobody ever learns the lessons from the Nixon administration, and she ended up having risen this high on the academic ladder, academic administrative ladder, to being out of a job because of trying to cover up the hockey scandal. However, because of her sufficient networking and movement through university circles, she was quickly employed. She quickly moved from this presidential position to a post at the National Science Foundation as, quote, Assistant Director of Education and Human Resources Director. One of these kind of Orwellian terms that we rely on in academic industry business. So after 34 years, this biologist co-administrator became a STEM person, and one of her first jobs, apparently, when she took over this post in the Bush administration, remember this is around 2000, and No Child Left Behind was sort of the educational administrative act, was she walked in, saw this term SMET, and said, that's ugly, let's make it STEM. And STEM stuck. And it stuck in a big way. And again, here let me start with a couple disclaimers about what I am trying to do and what I'm not trying to do in this talk and in this larger project. One is, when I critique STEM, which I'm going to do pretty hard here, I am not critiquing science. I'm not critiquing chemistry, I'm not critiquing biology, I'm certainly not critiquing medicine, I am not critiquing mathematics, any of those good things. I love them as much as anyone, and we need them desperately. And I'm particularly cautious here because we live in a time of great anti-science fervor, right? Whether that's climate change or stem cell research or anything like that. I'm trying to thread a needle here, in other words, which is science is a good thing. I certainly don't want to give any ammunition to the anti-science groups out there. At the same time, I think the acronym of STEM as a marketing tool, as a piece of ideology, does need substantive critique. So I'm trying to tear those things apart, right? Let me quote a famous artist here, Pink, okay? I want to start a fight, but I want to make sure I start the fight with the right folks. And again, particularly even at a university like ours, which our rhetoric on STEM is sometimes irritating to me. This is a university which supports all sorts of research financially in a way that our peer institutions don't. So I want to be also there a little cautious and careful about what I'm talking about and what I'm targeting here. I don't want what I'm saying, in other words, to be yoked into some other sort of ugly things. And again, I know that's probably, disclaimers are such that they never sort of really work, but I'll sort of try them anyway. And I'll also add one last disclaimer. I love science, folks. I love science faculty. They're some of the most intelligent, thoughtful people I know. If any of them are here, this is nothing personal. In fact, one of the comic things of STEM marketing is that all of a sudden people like me, as I said in my little promotional brochure, all of a sudden we've been pushed into the role of I never knew this before, but one of the things I am supposedly teaching is soft skills. Okay? Which is an interesting kind of metaphor to begin with and one to sort of get my back up. But I'm really not the person to be teaching soft skills. And frankly, if you've been around Research 1 humanities departments, even though I've got wonderfully, I feel bad saying this because my humanities colleagues in the room are actually people who do have very good soft skills, so you guys are providing a bad example for a good thing. Humanities research departments around the country, for those of you that know them, are really not the place you want to go for soft skills. Okay? We're as nasty, as cantankerous as anyone. So it's fairly odd that one of the sort of fallouts of this sort of STEM marketing is that all of a sudden English departments and history departments and philosophy departments of all things are being suggested that they have some sort of people skills that other disciplines don't, which, as we all know, is pretty bizarre. Pretty bizarre. There's a range of human behavior and no discipline has a handle on this. Okay. Anyway, here's some of my favorite marketing I thought I'd play for you. Again, you know this stuff, but for me, in writing this project or dealing with this project, one of the things is I get information. It's a different sort of research project for me, is I get information every day. All I have to do is turn on social media or turn on Wayne Today, and I have information handed to me. I don't have to go to the library. I don't have to go to the archives. I am awash in STEM materials that come at me in all sorts of different ways, forms, and shapes. It's kind of an everyday thing. But here's one of my favorites that came out. This is a Verizon commercial. An interesting turn. You see this? I hope
what do you
this
want to be
comes
when
up.
you grow up?
I thought about becoming an actor and or a model.
I'd love to be a soccer player one day.
What do most of your friends want to be?
Some want to be football players, basketball players.
But the truth is, we don't need more Drews.
We don't need more Villas.
We don't need more Adrianas.
We don't need more LeBrons.
We need more kids to see the world of possibilities, but millions of students still don't have the tech they need to go after their dreams. That's why Verizon is on a mission to help. We're giving free tech, free access, and hands-on learning to kids in need. Join us at weneedmore.com.
You want to be the next big thing.
Sure. In short, we're Verizon and we're here to help. And we're here to help to tell you this is what you should be doing as a young person. By the way, one of the things that Walter did not mention in my biography is that in addition to being professor and chair, I'm also the father of 2 kids of elementary school age. And so the STEM marketing and promotion, if you've noticed it here at the university level, you ought to spend some time in K-12 or pre-K and 12 and up, where the STEM marketing is extraordinary. It must rival, I think it must rival anything that happened in the Sputnik era. To give you some sense of STEM marketing, I turned to sort of a local area. This is our write-up. And again, I don't mean to pick on our faculty. I certainly don't mean to pick on the dean, who's my boss, and I certainly don't mean to pick on my college. But here's the marketing for our recent STEM Commons. And you don't have to read this all the way through. This is a marketing or media piece put together for us. Just take a look at the language as it's used, the STEM highlighting. And this is the sort of stuff we're seeing all over the place. This is on an everyday basis where you get this sort of repetition of STEM, what I call STEMlicious. Okay? This kind of repetition, of course, is the sort of thing that really catches. How do I go back on this? Back arrow? Back arrow on this one?
Back arrow.
Yeah, but I don't know if she's got it set up on the. Okay. By the way, this is back to Shakespeare to bring in some more scholarship. When you see this kind of repetition in marketing, this is the Eponatos, like the guy, the woman from Ipanema, right? This is a sort of figure, a rhetorical figure of repetition that folks like me are trained to point out, right? And that's something, oddly enough, in the humanities is not going on, or at least I see it in terms of STEM. In other words, we tend to be very good at critiquing all kinds of ideological forms, but when it comes to STEM, my folks, my brethren, have been surprisingly very silent. And we're rarely silent about anything. But again, that makes me skeptical, that makes me concerned. When people aren't talking about something, when people aren't talking or critiquing something, I get nervous. And by the way, this is an example of this kind of repetition. This is some of the things I'm going to try to do in the book, is juxtapose STEM language to some of what Shakespeare does. This is lines from Richard II, famous line of John of Gaunt. John of Gaunt, by the way, is just, he's an old diplomat who has regretted turning his son over to the king, and he is talking to Richard II as he gets sick and old, and he says, "How that name befits my composition, old Gaunt indeed, and Gaunt in being old. Within me grief hath kept a tedious fast, and who abstains from meat that is not gaunt? For sleeping England long time have I watched. Watching breeds leanness, leanness is all gaunt. The pleasure that some fathers feed upon is my strict fast, I mean my children's looks, and therein fasting hast thou made me gaunt. Gaunt am I for the grave, gaunt as a grave, whose hollow womb inherits naught but bones." And of course, King Richard, Shakespeare is not deaf to any of this. When he sets up repetition like this, one of the things he's going to do is provide an internal critique of it. And he has King Richard say, "Can sick men play so nicely on their names? What's with the repetition?" And this is a standard lesson from Shakespeare studies. Something you would teach a basic undergraduate course of literature is that when a sophisticated author or sophisticated playwright calls attention to repetition or use of language in a certain way, one of the things you should be learning is to pick up your ears and ask, why is that? What's going on? What is being communicated here? And again, something is happening in the culture and in the academic culture. Not just, I don't want to take Shakespearean criticism and use it as a blunderbuss to turn it on Wayne marketing, for example, or Wayne Beatty, right? That's a little too heavy-handed. It's like taking the shotgun to the mouse in the garage or something like that. That's not my intention. But this stuff is starting to impinge on the academic side of the university. It is starting to move into the realm which is not marketing and media studies, and shift what the university actually is and think. And in my lifetime, I've never seen anything happen quite so powerfully and quite so quickly. Again, we're talking 2000. We're talking 2000 when this acronym comes into business, right? And all of a sudden, certain people who have long identified themselves as chemists, as mathematicians, as folks in the physics department, all of a sudden, they are now being identified as STEM faculty. This is kind of news to them. And I think it should be news to everyone, or much bigger news than it is. Okay, well, I've talked about, there's been very limited critique. I do want to point out someone who is involved in critiquing this. This is Andrew Hacker. He's a political science by training. He had a couple articles in the New York Times and the New Yorker. He's written kind of a popular book called The Math Myth and Other STEM Delusions. And he says essentially what I would be thinking more people should be saying. I say of STEM what he says of math specifically, which is, I refer not to the disciplines but STEM as ideology, even secular religion. And again, this is what makes me nervous. And again, as I referred to, this is going on not just at the university, but at the K-12 level. Here's an interesting stat for me. And again, if you're of a certain age, right, over 40, this number should hit you really hard. As recently as 1982, only 55% of high school graduates had a course in algebra, and 47% had taken geometry. Today, 88% who finished have had a geometry course, and 76% have had 2 years of algebra. Those are stunning numbers, right? And they kind of explain rather quickly why various groups, from Betsy DeVos on down, can point to the failure of our schools, right? That the schools are failing. We're not teaching math. We don't know anything, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when you look at a statistic like that, where all of a sudden you're asking about half the population, a little under half the population, to take courses in, and some of you may be old enough to remember an old distinction between arithmetic and mathematics. You know the distinction between arithmetic and mathematics, right? Arithmetic is what most of us do during the day, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Mathematics is what starts with algebra. And most mathematicians would say, you know, algebra is a pretty weird way to get people interested in mathematics, but it has become the organizing part of American education in a very strange and surprising way. And has also, by the way, one of the things that's also happened, it has also sparked or spawned about a 10, I would say, it's, you know, I've seen different figures now, a $10 to $15 billion tutoring industry. In other words, when you're asking public school kids to take these courses that they can't possibly complete, well, guess what parents are going to do? They are going to go to a private, non-tax, under-the-table tutoring system to make this work. Let me go ahead. Okay. Politicians, of course, have joined in this and have most recently framed this as a sort of, very strangely, as a butter versus guns sort of issue, the old economics term. Are we going to put our resources into butter, or are we going to put them into guns? Here I have a couple quotes up here, very popular ones that got a lot of media attention. There are many of them, they keep going on. Governor Rick Scott of Florida, is it a vital interest of the state to have more anthropologists? I don't think so. Governor Matt Bevin of Kentucky, all the people in the world who want to study French literature can do so. They're just not going to be subsidized by the taxpayers like engineers will be, for example. Governor Pat McCrory, North Carolina, if you want to take gender studies, that's fine. Go to a private school and take it, but I don't want to subsidize that if that's not going to get someone a job. Governor Mitt Romney, remarkably someone who's done very well in life with his English major, seems not to see any connection between his undergraduate studies and his rather substantial life success, right? Mitt Romney, as an English major, I can say this, your options are, you better go to graduate school, all right? Senator Marco Rubio, welders make more money than philosophers, we need more welders and less philosophers. I remember John Corvino in philosophy responded to this and got a lot of email from welders and sort of things like this when this sort of came out. Of course, we're in an academic setting and everyone might immediately say, oh, those damn Republicans, right? Those damn folks on the right, these are all Republican politicians. Well, let's look at the main guy. You know, the one figure who is everyone's leader. Here's President Obama on STEM. A lot of young people no longer see the trades and skilled manufacturing as a viable career, but I promise you folks can make a lot more potentially with skilled manufacturing of the trades than they might with an art history degree. Now, nothing wrong with an art history degree. I love art history. And of course, the good president did back off this and try to backpedal away because so many of his constituents sort of called in. But nonetheless, when this is the presidential decree, you get a sense of where we're at. And this is what I'm talking about with my ideological suspicion. This is not a Republican right-wing issue. Like all things that are serious ideologically, it spans the corner. Which takes us to Mr. Neutral himself, Bill Gates, right? This is Bill Gates giving an award in Washington to a teacher of the year. And I like to show this because, number one, this creeps the hell out of me if you have kids in school. But it's also, to me, incredibly illustrative of what's going on and the coercive nature of this. So if you kind of tune in, not so much to what's said, but the drama of this, the tone of this, and take a look at the teacher in response. I mean, she's sitting there, you know, as an elementary school teacher, I can't remember this as elementary or middle school teacher, sitting across from Bill Gates, who's just been given an award, answering questions about STEAM, and by the way, we'll talk about the variations on acronym. You know, we are trapped in acronym land. You know, STEAM, of course, is STEM plus arts. That's sort of to appease people like me that point out, hey, you know, we're still here. Well, if we toss an A, you know, you'll be accommodated. No, no, we won't.
Well, congratulations on being Teacher of the Year.
Thank you so much.
And I understand you teach science to very young kids.
Yeah, my class is called STEAM Lab, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. I can talk to them about how all those different subjects integrate together and the skills that they use transfer across.
At that young age, do you get all the kids pretty engaged, the boys and the girls?
Oh yeah, definitely. I do projects in the arts and creative problem solving, really working on developing those soft skills, you know, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking skills.
Yeah, it's interesting you put art in there as well.
Yeah, and I use it a lot to just talk to students about how it's that imagination, that creativity, the innovation side of their brain that they're always using no matter what else they're doing. And those people who are going to be the most successful in the future are going to be people that have that lens on, okay, how can I make this work better? How can I solve the problem?
Yeah, it's great to expose kids to stuff like that. I mean, it used to be cars, you would kind of take them apart. Now, things are kind of digital. You kind of mess around with the pieces less.
In this civil engineering unit, kids came through on this first day, and then I said, okay, here's all of the supplies, you know, all these different Legos and blocks and different things I have. Show me what you would build if you were going to build a bridge. And almost every kid, you know, block, 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 road on top, just basic kid bridge, you know. But this one boy, he went over and got the Legos out, and he designed an arch bridge with the Legos in about 5 minutes.
Wow.
He's one of the most struggling readers in second grade. He's kind of getting by in math, but every single thing that he built, every assignment I gave him, he was the first one finished. And you can just see it in his face that he has this new determination because he knows he's smart at something. It's like his whole worldview is bigger. And that's such a special moment for me as a teacher.
Well, it's inspiring to hear what you're doing. Thanks so much for spending time with me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Legos, for those of you that don't know, by the way, is the marketer and promoter of the robotics movement in K-12 education. Lego's stock is skyrocketing because K through 12 robotics is going off the charts. So the Legos, you know, that the boy went from blocks, symbols, or wooden blocks over here by unnamed manufacturer to Legos in the promotional video is kind of, it's not a coincidence. Again, so obviously, you know, one of the things I'm going to try to do in the book is sort of tease out where did this, you know, where did we come up with this guns butter divide, right? That there's, you know, that there's something about the liberal arts that is antithetical to science, right? We've just witnessed, you know, post-war history where English majors and philosophy majors and history majors were all over the place, right? And we had plenty of art history. That really didn't slow down scientific advancement at all. If anything, there was quite a healthy symbiotic relationship between the two from, say, 1945 on, when supposedly the disaster of the liberal arts was, you know, dragging on scientific achievement or advancement. I just sort of put a couple things up there. We can add any number of different ones to that list. But here's sort of the more critical and nasty part, things I want to explore. Here are some things that do correspond with the rise of STEM. Trumpism, anti-immigrant sentiments, which we'll get to in a minute. When people talk about low American math scores, they are very often talking about a particular group of American math scores, right? They're not talking about all American math scores. What is concerning some of the politicians and the marketers is how particular groups of Americans are doing in math. Coincides with our general anti-intellectualism, the corporatization and privatization of the K-12 university, militarization, our political divides, Walter's conference next week, a breakdown of civil discourse, and also, I think most importantly, a breakdown of our union structures. Lots of people, when they hear STEM, think skilled trades. They don't think NASA. and sort of what's the relationship between the two and how do those work themselves out. So again, here's what K-12, a lot of K-12 American parents are imagining when their schools provide them with STEM marketing or STEM promotion. This is a scene from Apollo 13, a very sort of distinctive image of white guys who look more or less like me with a crew cut and starch white shirts and ties. That's in some ways what the fear or anxiety is that we've lost, right? So what's being marketed to American parents of a particular kind is this version of STEM. Here's what state reps and business groups, I think, are imagining when they hear STEM. This is another way around to get to skilled trades, right? Which, absent a union apprenticeship structure, people are discovering they don't have workers, and what they really want are non-union compliant, non-alcoholic workers in some way that can staff things. So what you'll see in the media again and again is this blurring of massive STEM and skilled trade STEM. This is some Bureau of Labor statistics from 2014, 2015. Here's the total number of jobs at the top, which you can see, the total number of jobs predicted in 10 years. So that's a total increase in predicted jobs. This is an optimistic prediction, I think, of 10.8. But it's the most valid across the board level of stats that we have. And so if we look at that 10.8%, and by the way, this is arithmetic. I can do arithmetic really well. Math, I'm not an expert. Arithmetic, I'm very good at. The predicted need for chemists of that 10.8% is 5,400. The predicted need for physicists is 2,400. And the predicted need, poor mathematicians, they're almost like literary critics, 800, okay? That means we're talking 900 new spots each for the next 10 years. But again, that's that distinction. Parents and kids and teachers are being told those are where the STEM jobs over here, but the real STEM jobs, to the extent there are STEM jobs, are skilled trades. So we're talking two different things when we use that single acronym. And that to me is very deceptive and very dangerous. Sorry, I know you can't read this from all the way back here. This is information that comes from the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. And it asks, do people with STEM degrees do STEM at all? And I won't read all this to you or go through it, but here's the upshot. I did a little bit more arithmetic for you. Of all the degrees in what we call STEM, of those 17.2 million degrees in math and science as of 2008, 2.6 million were not in the labor force. We don't know where they were. Okay, that's a lot of really degreed people for a nation that's supposedly dealing with the STEM crisis. That is, they weren't out of work, nor were they seeking work. For some perspective, there are about 3 million teachers constitute the largest labor force in the country. But again, if we skip down, what I want to point out with the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics is that less than 40% of our math and science degree holders do, in any practical sense, math and science at their jobs. That makes sense? This is amazing. Again, we're being told on the one hand that we need these skills, but these skills as they're actually put to place in the workforce aren't nearly as of use. And again, you'll find a remarkable number of STEM proponents with math and science degrees who, as far as I can tell, aren't doing anything like STEM that I could possibly recognize. They're doing an awful lot of marketing, but not anything like science. Anyway, one of the reasons a literary critic should take this on is I love Science for Dummies book these days as I'm sort of writing this. And one of my favorites is Yuval Noah Harari, and he talks us about the need that one reason that Homo sapiens went out in their evolutionary battle with other sorts of groups such as Homo neanderthal and Homo erectus was their capacity to tell stories. Their capacity to tell compelling fictions and stories. That's pretty important. What is narrative? How does it organize ourselves? And one of the things, big picture, I'm trying to do with the book or the project is to ask, what is this story of STEM that we're telling ourselves at our moment? And it's to me, it's a particularly pernicious story because it's moving into the place, the university and the schools, which is supposed to be able to critique those stories, right? STEM, in other words, is starting to impinge on the very thing which could elucidate its problem. And that, to me, as an English professor, who again lives his life by this stuff, is a very serious concern. We can skip that. Anyway, I do want to end. I'll sort of end here and open up. I know this is, as Jared said, this is kind of dinner table conversation for lots of people. I do want to end with sort of with one more handout, or just read. I don't have enough handouts, but thanks to Lisa Maruka passing this along to me, another sort of article. Humanities majors. This is from some of the CEOs of CEO of YouTube, which I've used here. Susan Wojcicki majored in history. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, majored in philosophy. Stuart Butterfield, the CEO of Slack, majored in philosophy. Alexa Hirschfeld, co-founder of Paperless Post, majored in classics. Parker Harris, co-founder of Salesforce, majored in English literature. Jack Ma, co-founder of Alibaba, majored in English. So I'll stop there and open it up to questions and comments. There's a lot to sort of respond to or talk about. And again, I'll always happy to return to my disclaimers at some point. Yes. Sorry, down here at the end was the first hand up, and then I think it was Dick and, sorry.
Interesting about your theory on fiction stories. Do you think then that STEM is coming at a time when possibly the designers of the scheme feel that how we got those stories traditionally is no longer necessary? Maybe like what's happened with the television revolution in the last decade?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think there's a deep fear and a deep anxiety in an age of social media and messaging, right? Of any critique of messaging and media. You know, it's funny. On the one hand, Twitter and Facebook and all those good things have allowed people, you know, to shoot their mouths all over the place. But there does seem to me, again, at least in my professional lifetime, a deep skepticism of what I would call critical inquiry. In other words, the basic values of academic exploration that I was brought up on seem to be disappearing. Literally disappearing. We don't want to talk about the stories. We don't want to talk about the narrative. And again, I'm a Stanley Fish proponent on university life. His book "Save the World on Your Own Time," where he says, faculty members, you do your research over here, and you teach, and you don't get involved. The administration has to run things, and I kind of like that divide. But this is a case where administrative marketing and pushes, right, are impinging again onto the academic side of things. And I think, as you say, limiting inquiry, limiting the value of reading history, of conducting a kind of critical analysis, of looking at language seriously, of looking at language outside the language of communication and marketing, which to me is, in the last couple of years, is to the point of being downright shocking. So yeah, my short answer to your question is yeah, I think there is that going on. Nick?
Well, barn burner, just so many great ideas that you put out. Just two things. Do you see, looking at this from the perspective of discourse and narrative, that it's not simply a national narrative. This is not simply an American preoccupation, but it's a world discourse. And if one looks at Asia, one looks at China, for example, Japan, Korea, the emphasis is on STEM.
Yeah.
How many graduates in engineering graduate from Chinese universities? And then the Chinese look for ways to distinguish themselves because the pyramid is so steep in China. So they're desperate about having an experience, graduate experience in Australia or Canada, hopefully the United States and so on. So I think the discourse is a world discourse rather than a simply local discourse. The other thing is, we're kind of products of the Enlightenment. I mean, one could really drive that home, where there's a powerful, certainly in our culture, a powerful belief in progress. And you look at medicine, for example, my God, before Fleming discovered penicillin, people died of infections. And if you go today to China, to the Chinese College of Holistic Medicine in Zhejiang, China, they will tell you, as they told me the medical class I went with, that the first diagnosis is Western. Somebody comes in with infection, boom, penicillin.
Yeah.
At the you know, and they teach acupuncture, herbal therapy, and so on. So the power that science has is just extraordinary. And the second point, actually the third, this is part of the second point. My experience in the School of Medicine is the concern faculty have with quackery. So it's a soft skill. We acknowledge it. We know about listening to people. When you listen, you don't wiggle your ears, you don't look at yourself. So it's reduced to a set of discrete actions which doesn't really get at powerful listening. How do you listen as a physician to someone who comes in with pain and is afraid of dying? And what do the humanities say about the clinical event? And how can the humanities help people become better listeners? Forget the stuff about active listening and not wiggling your ears and so on. But let's talk about equality of attention, and what does that mean in a deeper sense. So I mean, this kind of, how do we reach people across the divides, the disciplinary divides, but also the larger cultural divides in the wider society. I want my child who goes to school to have a job at the end of this. I want my child to be practical. There's one Stephen Jobs, one Bill Gates. Jobs, as everybody knows, dropped out of Reed College, and he started auditing a calligraphy course, and I'm sure his mother and father said, what the hell are you going to do with calligraphy? And then he makes the point, we had proportional spacing 10 years later at Apple before anybody else. So, you know, there it is in plain English.
Yeah, no, those are two huge sort of issues. One is, you're absolutely right about, I treat this almost exclusively as an American sort of issue, as apart from, I think it is really tied to sort of our, to me, you can't, it's sort of obvious. You can't look at our current anti-immigrant sentiment, right, in the country, and not connect that to this STEM anxiety, which is being marketed here and there. But I think you're absolutely right about the international scene. And medicine in particular is sort of its own giant sort of planet with its own, I agree, those are both incredibly important. I agree on that, but big ones, yeah.
My training's in history of science. It's rusty, but my mathematics isn't bad. I've actually gotten grants from the NSF. So I walk both sides of this, or at least I have historically. The reason I got NSF grants is because when they set that up, and the last time we got all wigged out about not having enough science and math, they set up these institutions, and some, probably in their minds, insultingly small part of the budget, 2%, is devoted to history and philosophy of science. Because there was a perception that, while this is not our main emphasis, these are important. Among the heart of this creature, there was a sense that these are important aspects of human knowledge that we should be promoting. It's always the first thing they want to put on the chopping block when there's talk about funding cuts. That doesn't really surprise me. What surprises me, I guess, is why was that realization there the last time we went around? That this isn't all there is, it's important, we need to emphasize it. Fast forward to now, I, like you, have absolutely nothing. I want my kids to learn the science and math and robotics, but it's become so imperialistic. This is all that is legitimate. We are soft skills, and that is just the politest possible way of saying you're superfluous and don't matter in the slightest. It would be better if you went away and gave us your minimal funding. Why is it so imperialistic?
Stop being a distraction. Yeah, I mean, it's that strange linkage between, you're right, there was always that precarious for folks like us sort of balance, right, that you felt in all sorts of ways. And I think in some ways that's the sentence I would run up, right, that balance is, at least in my professional experience or time, has dropped.
But why?
Well, I think it's the marketing. I think it's this confluence of different forces. It's the Gates Foundation, I think it's, frankly, I think it's the university's disconnect or inattention to what's been going on in K-12 education, right? The waves of this have hit, we've been fortunate and sort of walled off in our own way. The way that this has sort of hit and transformed K-12 education and sort of seeped into communities and seeped into local municipal governments and has seeped into every part of the culture, well, I mean, I hate the metaphor, but we've been in our ivory tower or whatever, sort of walled off, has allowed it to unsettle that balance, you know what I mean? And that precarious balance that was there for years and years and years, I would say post-war. You know, you don't know a real scientist, a productive scientist who doesn't value in some way literary studies or history or philosophy or something like that. You don't have a brain. You don't have someone with an active brain who doesn't. But that's been lost. But my sort of short answer as to why is it's seeped in so powerfully into communities through K-12 education that the university has simply been caught off guard.
I've also heard that you and I don't do research at this university.
Oh, no, we don't do research.
We do scholarship. Research is this.
Yeah.
You and I do scholarship.
Well, I think it's, but again, now to throw it back on ourselves, frankly, it's my job. One of the things we have not been doing, to the extent I haven't been doing my job, which is, it's my job, and to yours to a certain extent, is to call attention to that language, right? Why are we handing over language to the media and marketing folks in communication? I don't want to, I don't want to hit people trying to do jobs and make a living and sort of things like that. But we're not, in my neck of the woods, we've been acting like this hasn't happened. I don't know if it's old-fashioned science envy. I don't know if it's an old-fashioned deference to that precarious balance that you talked about. I don't know if it's our own sense that, yeah, science is beautiful, particularly modern medical science is beautiful and wonder we've all benefited from it. I'm not sure what it is, which, I grew up in an age where people were critiquing everything, but again, now, somehow, and this is what I'm trying to figure out and tease out in the book, is how did STEM get walled off as an acronym, as a term, as a word, as a concept from any kind of critique? And it really is. It's impossible. Like, I feel bad doing it because I feel like I'm going to insult, people who actually want to give me more money than I would get at any other university, or people who are, doing cancer immunology and writing novels. There's plenty of that around. But yeah, that's part of what I'm trying to tease out in the book, is that answer to your question is why. And I think it's that period, from speaking of historical periods, that's what I'm trying to identify. There is a period shift that we're not fully recognizing. This looks so much, it's one of those cases where this looks so much like what we all grew accustomed to, but it's not.
It's not.
It's not. It's very different.
The little short you showed on play versus real work.
Yeah.
That's interesting because the producer or the screenwriter took the most cliched understanding of play as a kind of a form of nonsense, something that is relegated to childhood, and not a more profound understanding of what play is and what its relationship to creativity, innovation is. So we don't play. We don't play. Einstein said if he passed the lab and he heard laughing, it meant that people were onto something because they were being creative. Yeah. And so the marketing people really, they control this, but that was a great disappointment to show that to little kids and to say, you're not really, play, we don't play in class. Yeah. We don't, play has nothing to do with learning. Yeah. So those kinds of disjunctions, I think, are not helpful at all.
Yeah, they really are. And again, it's as Eric was saying, there used to be a sense of balance or proportion between those things that has significantly dropped off. And again, it's impinging even into early childhood education. We can comically laugh back to the old days of the tapes for Mozart for Babies. Tapes, which was the sort of suburban phenomenon of how we're going to. This is fundamentally different because this language is taking over. It's taking over the language of education itself, right? It's not. You no longer have that critical distance or irony. There's not us sort of standing back and saying, "Oh, that's just marketing." Those two things are conflated. So it's actually the teachers, right? It's the administration, it's even sometimes the educational theorists, right? Who are, this is the language they've adopted.
I can't help but thinking on my way here to the lecture today, I picked up a copy of Neil Tyson's Astrophysics for Those in a Hurry. And I thought to myself, you know, this is an age of science, but so many things are changing. I like art and poetry. But it just seems to me that a lot of things, science is changing. I was listening to the Nobel Prize winners and for medicine and this is an age where things are looking for an intensely practical bent. And it seems to me that poetry has never been, you know, poetry and art is seen for those people who have too much time in their hands. Whereas science is seen as this practical thing, you do things with it. So I kind of wonder if there's a PR battle, not just for the hearts and minds of people who are, but our whole educational system is in a flurry of trying to figure out what to do, how to engage people, because people just don't, they want to be entertained all the time, they want to be cuddled, and so what is education? I mean, if I could pick up Shakespeare for dummies or astrophysics for those in a hurry, I mean, something's going on.
Okay, yep. I mean, the point that the science, even Tyson, right? These sort of popular figures. Yeah, I don't want to, challenge them in any way, particularly because of the anti-sort of science crowd or factor here. But there seems to be, again, an increasing separation between science, people are sort of actually doing sort of science, and science, STEM in quotation marks. Yeah, I'm trying to get it. Yep. And sorry.
Do you have a hypothesis about whose interests are driving this phenomenon?
Oh.
It's not. It's obviously not kids because the jobs don't exist. It doesn't seem to be employers because the jobs don't exist. Is it STEM faculty? Is it the Republican Party? Is it Bill Gates?
Well,
who's benefiting?
I would say it's definitely not STEM faculty.
Yeah.
In fact, I haven't heard too much, but I think sooner or later, one of the things you're going to hear people start saying is, "Stop calling me STEM faculty." I'm a chemist, or I'm a chemistry professor. I did do chemistry. What do you mean you're a STEM faculty member or something like that? So take that one off. But the answer to the other one is it's one of those ideological. One of the things that makes it so pernicious is it's one of those things that happens where it's available to so many different groups, right? So you see, like here, the STEM folks, it's very easy to glob on and say, well, we need more women. You saw this with the teacher video. We need more women in STEM. Well, who would argue, right? We need more underrepresented groups in STEM. Well, who would argue? Who would criticize that? Why are you getting in the way of that? It's so accessible as a term or concept to so many different interest groups, including Bill Gates. And I would say, when you say who's driving it, the first thing that pops into my head is, Gates Foundation, the Gates Foundation. My early life was devoted to early modern charity and how sort of charitable groups and charitable foundations sort of shaped the world in supposedly benign ways. So that would be the main culprit. But I think what more interests me more and what I want to try to describe is how it's such an open and available ideological space for so many disparate groups. And that makes it so difficult to critique, right? Because it looks so darn good. You know what I mean? So short answer is, other than STEM faculty, which I want all of the above. But again, you can use the term neoliberal. Certainly Republicans have, Republican ideology has seized on this, and they're more than happy to use it as a, like they are with, so anything else as a stick. But so is what constitutes the American left, which is, again, kind of a difficult term to even use. I mean, theoretically, there's got to be an American left. It's just hard to sort of, say what that is. But to the extent there is one, they very much seized on this too, because it ties so neatly into the idea of scientific progress. This is an age of science. How do you not like Tyson, right? When he gets in, and seems so intelligent and alive and bright. How do you not, but again, that's what makes me so suspicious. I'm very suspicious of things that I can't critique. And this seems to be item number one. So, but yeah, yes.
I just wanted to touch note on what President Obama said about the,
Art history.
it's nice for you to major in art history, but you're not really going to make any money in that, which is, I think, is somewhat true for me. I have an undergrad degree. I'm in master's program.
Okay.
My cousin, who graduated from a 6-month program doing HVAC, is making $30 an hour, and I'm over here making minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of see that if I have a child in the future, that I would want you to do more of a trade than afford an 8-year college degree.
Yeah, no, and again, I completely agree. And one of the groups that I have a great deal of sympathy with, who has seized onto the STEM mantra, is the skilled trades groups. I can't think of the acronym. Lisa might know it. There's an acronym that somehow builds on the STEM, but actually includes skilled trades, right? And those political groups and those folks have seized on this, right? My only critique there is when the skilled trade folk, when the businesses are going around and we've got all these business owners and these different business groups, the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, Doug Rothwell, people like that, and they're going around and what they're essentially saying is, we don't have good enough workers, right? We don't have skilled or trained workers. Well, yeah, you busted the unions. You'll do you'll do everything you can to get skilled trades that don't have job protections and sort of things like that. So that part I'm skeptical of. But the skilled trades folks have latched on to STEM. And that plays out really strangely in K-12 education, right? K-12 now pushes STEM, but they blur together. Are we talking about being an astrophysicist, or are we talking about being an air conditioning tech of some kind? I mean, both make a living, and but which one are we talking about here? And so those are the things that concern me. But yeah, I agree with you about
I also feel like one is like quick money, like skilled trades is like quick money, and then when the education, it's like you're gonna get in like 10 years type of.
Well, sorry, I mean, you're talking to an old-fashioned union Democrat, which is skilled trades are wonderful till you get 45.
Yeah.
And your back goes, and your knees go,
So
and
you
your
need
heart goes,
both.
and then you don't have. And you don't have union protections, right?
Yeah.
Skilled trades are great when you're 28, and you can do that kind of work, and you can make the money you're talking about. But what happens to every single family member, a friend of mine, that said, now that I'm in that age bracket, I'm happy I have my job, because I don't have to bend and crawl under anything. Where my friends I was in the same position as you, looking like, why are you making all that money? But now that they can't do that anymore without job protections. So that's my political thing.
Yeah. They get like Social Security at like 65, but you can still work.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
In education till you die.
Well, it's that range between 45 and 65, and now you're living in an economy where everyone is working well past 65. So that's a sort of economic shift as well.
One last question. I was going to ask, is there any areas that we see that there's not this separation, there's not this divide? And if there is, what are they doing that we're not doing?
Oh, great question.
Or has this happened in the past where we can replicate something, a solution that's worked for as well?
Well, my concern is like the conversation I had with Eric, which is this looks like something that's happened in the past, say post-Sputnik in America, where you had this sort of rush to Americans have to sort of compete with Russians, and this is and committing yourself to science was not just a personal economic endeavor; it was a sign of your nationalist, belief and how good of an American you are, and sort of things like that. But there was still a qualitative difference there because you still had these robust humanities programs, commitment to the arts, sorts of things like that. So is there a place in this culture or society where STEM is not having this kind of pernicious influence? I don't have a good answer for you. I mean, at the moment I see it as all pervasive. Maybe I'm too deep into my own stuff. But yeah, that's a critical question.
Humanities marketing, moment was the 50s and Chicago and the great books.
Yeah.
So they were able to, kind
Oh,
of,
good. Yeah, I had completely forgotten about that.
Yeah, they were able to like export a curriculum pretty broadly and market it to families. They had a product, and there were significant like academic texts that came out of it and institutions that came from it.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I would love to be able to touch on, I haven't written it up yet, is, of course, in the humanities has this whole history itself, right? Starting with the 60s and the 70s, and then the battle, what used to be called the culture wars, right? That humanities went from a great books sort of model to, oh, you guys are spending too much time talking about race, gender, and class, or in politics generally. And that's what kind of did you in. And that would be another piece of this, is how does that whole history, which is a very real history, how did that lay the groundwork or create the space for the sort of current STEM push, right? Which, again, like your question, I don't have a good answer for at the moment, or I don't have an interesting answer for it.